James Holloway had always loved to travel. He was the kind of person who thrived on exploring new places, meeting new faces, and, above all, making people laugh. Wherever he went, he found a way to entertain those around him, whether it was with a witty joke or a harmless prank. Some people appreciated his humor, while others thought he took things a bit too far. But James never meant any harm. He just loved having a good time. This time, his travels had taken him to London, a city he had long dreamed of visiting. He had read about its history, its iconic landmarks, and its rich traditions. The moment he arrived, he was captivated by the grandeur of the buildings, the sight of the red double-decker buses, and the blend of friendliness with formality that hung in the air. It was a world apart from what he was used to, and James was absolutely loving it. But James wasn't alone on this adventure. His loyal English bulldog, Max, was right there with him. Max wasn't just a dog. He was James's best friend. The two had been inseparable for years, and James had taught Max a whole array of tricks. From rolling over to playing dead, fetching on command to responding to hand signals, Max was a quick learner with a playful spirit. People often stopped James on the street just to admire the smart, well-behaved bulldog. On his second day in London, James decided to pay a visit to Buckingham Palace. He had seen pictures of it before, but nothing could prepare him for the sheer magnificence of it in person. The palace was enormous, its golden gates gleaming in the sunlight. Tourists were everywhere, snapping pictures and watching the royal guards stand as still as statues. James had heard the stories about these guards, how they never flinched, never cracked a smile, and never reacted no matter what antics the crowd threw at them. This, he thought, was going to be interesting. As he walked closer with Max at his side, James couldn't help but notice how tourists were desperately trying to get the guards to react. Some pulled faces, others spoke to them, and a few even pretended to trip in front of them. But the guards remained unmoving. It was as if they were impervious to anything that happened around them. This piqued James's curiosity even more. What would it take, he wondered, to break their composure? Then, an idea popped into his head, and a grin spread across his face. It wasn't a mean-spirited thought, just a little joke to liven up the moment. He looked down at Max, who sat obediently by his side, as if sensing that something was afoot. Max was trained to follow commands to the letter, and James wondered if his bulldog could pull off something that even the unshakable guards couldn't ignore. Excited, he bent down and whispered to Max, pointing toward the nearest guard. The crowd was distracted, none the wiser to what James was planning. Max's ears perked up as he locked eyes with the guard, ready to follow whatever cue James gave him. James smiled to himself, thinking this would just be another fun memory of his trip. But little did he know, what was about to unfold would be far from what he expected. Standing near the gates of Buckingham Palace, James was mesmerized by the sight of the royal guards. Their uniforms were flawless, their posture rigid, and their faces completely impassive. They stood completely still, no matter how much noise or movement occurred around them. Tourists tried everything they could to provoke a reaction, waving, pulling faces, but the guards stood like statues. James couldn't help but marvel at their discipline. Max, sitting at his feet, wagged his tail, completely at ease in the midst of the bustling crowd. The dog loved being around people, especially in places like this where the attention was often on him. James scratched Max behind the ears and smiled. "What do you think, buddy? Do you reckon we can get them to crack?" Max tilted his head slightly, as though considering the challenge. As James surveyed the crowd, he noticed a young boy standing in front of one of the guards, making all sorts of silly faces. The guard didn't flinch. The crowd laughed, enjoying the harmless moment, but James had another idea. What if Max tried something? Max was trained in various tricks, and one of his favorites was running toward people on command. It was always harmless, just a way to get a laugh back home, nothing more. This time, James thought it would make for a light-hearted prank. He imagined the crowd laughing, maybe the guard giving a little flinch, and then moving on, entertained by the harmless joke. James looked down at Max, his voice barely above a whisper. "Go say hello." Max perked up, ears standing at attention. Without hesitation, the dog bounded forward with excitement, his short legs carrying him toward the guard. The tourists turned their attention to the little bulldog, some laughing as they watched him charge toward the soldier. After all, Max wasn't exactly intimidating, just a goofy, playful dog with a wagging tail. When Max reached the guard's feet, he began sniffing around, circling the soldier with the curiosity only a dog could have. James stood back, eagerly watching. Surely the guard would give in, at least cracking a small smile or looking down at the dog. But no, the guard remained utterly still. Max wasn't used to being ignored. He barked, first once, then again, and pawed lightly at the guard's boot. Still, there was no reaction. The crowd murmured with amusement, but James could sense that something wasn't right. A security officer, clad in a dark uniform, had spotted what was going on and was now heading toward James. His movements were swift and deliberate, and something about the way he approached made James feel a little uneasy. Thinking nothing of it, James whistled for Max to return. The dog happily obeyed, trotting back toward James, still wagging his tail. But before James could attach Max's leash and move along, the officer's voice cut through the air. "Sir, step aside, please." James turned around, his heart racing. The officer was standing right in front of him now, his expression unreadable. The playful atmosphere from moments ago had completely evaporated. The officer's eyes were hard, and his body language was anything but relaxed. "Is this your dog?" the officer asked, his voice firm. James swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sir. His name's Max. He's just playing around. No harm done." He chuckled nervously, hoping to ease the tension. But the officer didn't smile. Instead, he gestured toward another guard, who was now walking toward them. A hush fell over the surrounding crowd as they sensed something serious was unfolding. Some had even started recording on their phones. "You cannot allow your dog to approach the royal guards," the officer said. "It's considered a security breach." James blinked, confused. A security breach? Come on, it was just a joke. Max is harmless. He wasn't going to hurt anyone. The second officer, now by his side, exchanged a glance with the first before turning to James. "Sir, do you realize that interfering with a royal guard on duty is a serious offense?" James shifted uneasily. He knew that London had strict rules, but he hadn't thought his harmless prank would lead to this. Back home, it would have been laughed off, but looking at the officers now, it was clear they were taking this very seriously. Max, sensing the tension, sat obediently by James, his tongue lolling out as he panted happily, blissfully unaware of the trouble he had caused. "I didn't mean any disrespect," James said, trying to stay calm. "I was just trying to make people smile. It wasn't meant to cause any trouble." The first officer's expression remained unmoved. That's not how security works in today's world. Any movement toward the royal guards is treated as a potential threat until proven otherwise. James felt a knot form in his stomach. He wanted to explain that Max was just a dog and that he wasn't trying to break any rules, but he knew it wouldn't matter. The officers weren't interested in his excuses. They were focused on enforcing the rules. More tourists had gathered, watching the scene unfold. Some whispered to one another, while others kept recording. James realized Whatever happened next, it was going to be witnessed by a lot of people. The first officer stepped forward. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with us for questioning." James's heart started to race. "Wait, what? You're taking me in?" The officer nodded curtly. "Yes. You'll need to answer some questions regarding this incident." James looked down at Max, then back at the growing crowd. He'd only wanted to have a little fun. He never imagined his harmless prank would land him in real trouble. For a moment, James stood frozen, struggling to process the situation. What had started as a simple joke was spiraling out of control. The officers weren't joking. The serious tone in their voices made it clear this wasn't a minor misunderstanding. It was a major issue. Max, oblivious to the mounting tension, wagged his tail and nudged James's hand. James absent-mindedly patted him, trying to calm his nerves, though his mind was anything but calm. The crowd had grown more curious, whispers echoing through the air. It felt like all eyes were on him, and for the first time in a long while, James felt small and exposed. The officers weren't wasting any time. One of them grabbed a radio and spoke into it, requesting backup. Panic bubbled up in James's chest. What were they thinking? What could he possibly have done to deserve this? "Please follow me, sir," the officer said, his tone firm but without emotion. James wasn't sure what to do next. Arguing would only make things worse, so he silently followed the officers, glancing back at Max, who was happily interacting with the tourists. "It's okay, buddy," James whispered, unsure whether he was trying to comfort Max or himself.
The walk to the nearby security office felt endless. Each step added to his growing anxiety. What would happen now? Would he get a fine? Would he be banned from London? All he'd wanted was to have some fun. But now his innocent prank seemed to have snowballed into something far bigger than he could have imagined. The officers didn't speak much during the walk. James tried to break the silence, hoping for a chance to explain himself. But the officers simply nodded every time he opened his mouth. It was as if they had already decided his fate. Eventually, they arrived at a small, unremarkable building tucked behind the palace. Inside, another officer was waiting. He gestured for James to sit, and the cold room felt even colder as he lowered himself onto the chair. The officers sat across from him, their faces unreadable, and prepared to ask their questions. The officer who had first spoken cleared his throat. "We need to know why you chose to involve your dog with the Royal Guard. Were you aware of the potential risks of such an action?" James opened his mouth but struggled to find the right words. How could he explain that he hadn't meant any harm? That it was just a harmless joke? Nothing more? He took a slow, steadying breath. "I thought it would be funny," he said quietly. "I didn't realize it would be such a big deal. Max is a good dog. He wouldn't hurt anyone." The officer nodded, though his eyes remained cold. "Your intentions don't change the fact that this was a security breach. The Royal Guards are stationed for a reason, and any disturbance near them must be treated with caution. In today's climate, we cannot afford to take risks." James's stomach churned. What had started as an innocent attempt to make people laugh now felt like a colossal mistake. The officers weren't angry, but their professionalism made it clear that they weren't taking this lightly. Minutes dragged on as the silence in the room thickened. James replayed the entire incident in his mind. How had something so simple turned into this mess? What was supposed to be a funny story to tell later was now a serious problem. Max, his loyal companion, was probably still outside, blissfully unaware of the chaos his antics had caused. The officer continued to fill out paperwork, his pen moving steadily across the forms, while another officer stood by the window, scanning the palace grounds. James fidgeted in his seat, his nerves getting the best of him. He couldn't keep quiet anymore. "Look, I really didn't mean any harm," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "It was just a joke. I didn't think about the consequences. I love this city. I never wanted to cause trouble." The officer with the paperwork glanced up at him, his expression still unreadable. "We understand you didn't intend for things to escalate, but the fact remains that your actions could have put everyone involved at risk. Do you understand the severity of this, Mr. Holloway? James nodded slowly, feeling a lump form in his throat. He wasn't just in trouble. He had caused a real disturbance, and the officers were taking it seriously. He wanted to apologize again, but at this point, it felt like his words wouldn't matter. The reality of the situation was setting in. The minutes seemed to stretch into hours as James sat there, his heart pounding. He kept checking his phone, hoping for some sign of help or guidance, but nothing came. Finally, the officer put down his paperwork and looked James in the eye, his gaze hard. "Mr. Holloway, you'll be issued a fine," he said flatly. "And depending on how the situation is reviewed, there may be further consequences." James's heart sank. A fine, he could handle that. But the mention of further consequences made his stomach twist with anxiety. What did that mean? Was he going to be banned from the city? Was this going to lead to legal trouble? The officer continued, "For now, you're free to go. However, you must leave the area immediately. If we receive any more complaints or reports of inappropriate behavior, further action will be taken." James stood up slowly, feeling weak in the knees. He was being let go, but the tension in the room remained thick. The reality of his actions was settling in, and it wasn't something he could easily escape. "Thank you," James muttered, his voice thick with embarrassment. The officers didn't respond, merely watching him as he grabbed his things and turned to leave. As soon as he stepped outside, the cool London air hit him like a wave, but it didn't do much to ease the tightness in his chest. Max was still waiting by the gates, wagging his tail happily, completely unaware of the trouble he'd caused. The sight of his dog only added to James's sense of guilt. He knelt down and patted Max, but the moment felt different now. The joy he had once felt about exploring London, about enjoying time with his dog, had been completely overshadowed by the consequences of his actions. He had learned the hard way that some things, no matter how innocent they seemed, could lead to serious consequences. James walked away from the security office, his head spinning. The breeze did little to calm his nerves, and Max trotted beside him, blissfully unaware of the weight of the situation. James couldn't help but look at his dog and wish for the simplicity of the day before, when everything had felt carefree. What had started as a harmless prank had turned into something he would never forget. The officer's words echoed in his mind. "You'll be issued a fine." The idea of paying a fine was bad enough, but what really gnawed at James was the mention of other consequences. What if this turned into a legal issue? What if he was banned from London altogether? The uncertainty tightened around him, a constant, uncomfortable pressure. Max, sensing the shift in his owner's mood, looked up at him with those trusting eyes, as if wondering why James seemed so off. It made everything worse. Max was just a dog, innocent and unaware of the weight of the world on his shoulders. And yet, it was James who had let his playful nature lead him into this mess. He tried to shake off the guilt, but it lingered like a shadow, following him through the streets of London. The vibrant city, once a place of excitement and possibility, now felt like a distant, foreign place. Tourists snapped photos, locals moved with purpose, but to James it all seemed hollow. The fine was only part of the issue. What if his entire trip had been ruined by a single thoughtless joke? He had dreamed of this adventure for months, saved for it, and now it all felt like it was slipping through his fingers. James stopped, leaning against a lamppost, trying to clear his head. He pulled out his phone, hoping for a distraction, maybe a message from a friend to pull him out of his funk. But all he found were cheerful messages asking about his trip. How were the sights? What had he been up to? Was he having the time of his life? How could he tell them the truth? How could he admit that his harmless prank had snowballed into something far worse? The thought of facing his friends made him feel small. He'd always been the joker, the one with the funny stories and the ability to lighten the mood. Now, how could he explain that he'd gotten himself into serious trouble just by trying to make people laugh? Max sat down beside him, as if sensing his distress. James absent-mindedly ran his hand through his fur. "It's going to be okay, buddy," he whispered, though the words felt hollow. He knew he had to face this head-on, no matter how uncomfortable. The fine, the warning, it wasn't over yet, but he could control how he moved forward. Maybe it was time to call the number the officers had given him to get more clarity, to know exactly what he was facing. As he stood up, he glanced at the piece of paper with the officer's number scrawled on it. He'd been putting this off, hoping that maybe it was all just a bad dream. But now, there was no running from it. He dialed the number, each ring feeling like an eternity. When the voice on the other end finally answered, calm and professional, it felt like a small piece of the weight lifted from his chest. Good evening. This is the London Security Office. How can I assist you? James cleared his throat. Hi, my name's James Holloway. I was involved in an incident earlier today with a royal guard, and the officers told me to call for more information. There was a brief silence, followed by the sound of typing. Thank you for calling, Mr. Holloway. Let me pull up the details. The minutes stretched on, each tick of the clock making James's anxiety rise. Finally, the officer's voice returned. I have your file here. You were issued a fine for the incident involving the Royal Guard, along with a formal warning. You'll receive the fine by mail, and you may be asked to make a statement regarding the event. The investigation is still ongoing, and depending on the outcome, further action may be taken. James felt his stomach drop. A formal warning, a statement, all the things he had feared. Is there anything else I need to know? His voice was quieter than he intended. The officer paused. At this time, there is no appeal process. However, when you're contacted, you can provide a statement. We recommend being truthful and respectful. The final decision will be made after the investigation is complete. Okay, James said, trying to steady his breathing. Thank you for your help. The call ended, and James stood frozen, absorbing the words. The fine was the least of his concerns now. What if they decided to press charges? What if the investigation led to something worse? Max sat beside him, unaware of the storm raging inside his owner. James scratched behind his ears, grateful for the simple comfort his dog offered. Max had no concept of the world's complications. He was just happy to be with James, exploring the streets of London. In a way, James envied that simplicity. For a long moment, James let the quiet of the evening settle around him. The city was alive with people moving in and out of its bright, bustling spaces, but it felt like a different world now. It was hard to escape the feeling that his time here had been tainted, no matter how much he tried to move on. But there was no going back. What mattered now was what came next. With a deep breath, James looked at the sunset spreading across the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the city. It wasn't the end of his trip. He still had time. Time to make things right, to learn from his mistakes, and to try and enjoy the rest of his journey. Max, ever the optimist, stood up, wagging his tail, ready to keep walking. And for the first time in hours, James smiled. Maybe things had gone wrong, but that didn't mean it was over. As they walked together, one step at a time, the weight in James's chest eased slightly. There was still time left in London. Time to reflect, time to learn, and time to let go of the past and embrace the future. It wasn't perfect, but life never was. The important thing was to keep moving forward, just like Max was doing. One paw in front of the other, no looking back. And if this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join us for more unforgettable tales. Together, let's celebrate the power of love, loyalty, and family. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.